Our first paper session today covers a fairly wide field. The first talk is by Christian Pentzold, who is Professor of Media Studies at Universität Leipzig, and I think well known to many people here for his work on media memory in Wikipedia. So Christian, I'll stop the share. Feel free to take over and take it away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm a professor in Leipzig. I'm now in Leuven based just for this time. I'm try sharing my screen, but it tells me that the host has deactivated this screen sharing thing. So you might take a second look at this.
Try again.
Yes, there we are.
Apologies.
You should see this now.
Working perfectly.
Excellent. I have been looking at Wikipedia for like the past 17 years. I did my PhD as an ethnography amongst Wikipedians, asking the simple question, well, how it works. Wondering, why people stay with the trouble, even though they usually respond to, I like it, but it's also, well, terrible. Editing there, so becoming an editor myself, editing areas of cultural history, architecture, and things like that, and following the trails. And apparently, this idea of the connection in between Wikipedia and forms of memory came up. And so I think I very much connect to the keynote we just had in terms of thinking of the connection of how Wikipedia, in fact, intersects with cultural practices of memory making, or what I would call memory work, which is, I believe, an odd thing to ask, since Wikipedia would generally be treated as an element of history or archive or document. So the reverse to memory that always has is tainted, is social, is partial. But of course, I mean, following up, and I'm praying to the disciples here, that we all, well, I mean, we find all that in Wikipedia as well. Next to, I believe, an account of that would others treat as an historical account that very much tries to follow at least ambitions of historical writing. But you get basically a mixed bag of everything. With all kinds of politics implied in such a global multi-lingual project. So following up, what I believe we should start with is the idea of memory work, which comes from a very different direction, in fact. So it usually comes from an autobiographical form of therapeutical self-understanding and of recapturing life courses. And with Jose van Dijk, I agree that memory work is a complex set of what she called recursive activities. And I think this very much speaks to what Wikipedia also allows for in rewriting and redrafting and returning to different accounts of the past. It's very much more flexible and fluid, which of course is also, it speaks to our ideal of what historical writing is, which it isn't. That we put it in libraries. We believe like, okay, this is tackled. So we tackled the French Revolution, and everything is out there to know. Of course, I mean, it also lives from historical scholarship, from revisiting exactly these truths, we believe. And she writes, Jose van Dijk, that they shape our inner world, reconciling past and present, allowing us to make sense of the world around us, construct an idea of continuity between self and other. And I believe that Wikipedia is a resource in many ways of this memory making in terms of personal memory, in particular, this kind of life taking. I will return to this later, the life taking. So when something is happening, there is already this account of writing history, why making it, which of course also tries to set things down that then can be returned in individual memory work. Think of 9/11, for instance, and think of all other traumatic or festive events that have been with us, in particular during times of war and crisis. We had this wall, this COVID wall, but that is then again reflected in Wikipedia, and I would love to see these discussions going on there. Kuhn writes that memory work is an active practice of remembering, which again speaks to the activity of Wikipedians to take an inquiring attitude towards the past and activity of its reconstruction through memory. And Christine Lohmeyer and I rewrote in a piece for Media, Culture and Society that we would say that mediated memory work refers to the purposeful memory-related practices in which and through which the past is expressively and consciously represented, interpreted, reflective, and discursively negotiated. And this is all what we can find in Wikipedia. It is, and this has been described like, I mean, every book like starts with that. It is a nutshell. It is like a lab, whatever. It is under the microscope of larger societal processes that then also happen in Wikipedia. And Wikipedia not only reflects them, but is a catalyst also of these processes. So overall, I'd say that thinking about the kind of memory work I would like to follow in my work, and I'm inviting you at least to be critical or take a critical look at this, is that memory work always involves a couple of things that are places. And I was thinking about Wikipedia as such a space or place, a venue of an epistemic venue, in fact, of not only collecting, but also of creating and negotiating mnemonic historical truths, of collectives, of media, and of discourse, and of course of individuals taking part. So thinking of Wikipedia on these terms, I would propose to treat Wikipedia as what I call a global memory place. That is, of course, not global in the sense of being universal, but being potentially of a global scape, involving all the kinds of conflicts that might come through this particular constitution. It is, and here I followed this idea of a floating gap, in fact, comes from Jan Vansina, who used it for different kind of purpose in describing the floating gap in between where there is a lived memory amongst generations and the cultural memory of a past that has not been lived by the contemporaries. So it's like the gap of in between the fourth or third generation of people that then were losing this living memory, as we are now losing the living memory of the Holocaust, for instance, with the last people around, and which also kind of course, impacts on our way of mnemonic reconceptualization of these events. Whereas in Wikipedia, I would say the fluid gap is in between this fluid communicative forms of remembering and returning to certain elements and facts, and the more crystallized mode of cultural memory that we find on the Arctic escape that are always very much in interaction and change. But we have different modes, in fact, of interacting with the past. It is what we find on Wikipedia. It's technologically afforded, culturally resonant, I'd say, of course, with the potential of conflict and discursively realized forms of memory work, with forms of mnemonic, I'd say, articulation, manifestation, and recurrent discussion. So following up on this kind of idea, the two questions we were following in our work are on the one hand, how can we capture the layered or multi-sided negotiation and documentation of social memory on the one hand, and how can we take into account the permanent conflictuality, that's a term by Mathieu O'Neill from Canberra, who talked about this as tribes, rummaging Wikipedia and other online venues of mnemonic engagement. And one way a team around in Paris, around Tommaso Venturini, and in Amsterdam around Eric Brorer, Esther Weltefreder, came up with is a tool we were using, and it's called Contropedia. And you're probably aware of this, which is basically a different dashboards on top, layout on top of Wikipedia that allow it to put something up front. And what it does, making up front are conflicts or a certain level of conflictuality around terms in Wikipedia. So what you see here in red or in violet are basically terms that are, in a sense, contested. And when we think about contestation in terms of the time, edits are made, the number of edits, and the number of editors that are involved in these, you usually know it's a revert, it's an edit, a revert, it's an edit, or more extensive forms of editing that make, first of all, things up front. So elements in such a text like this one that are, and you see, for instance, one of the terms that has been highly contested is the idea, was the Srebrenica massacre, was it a genocide or wasn't it? Is there a different way of framing it and phrasing it? And you can, of course, come up with, I mean, you probably know of a couple of articles that are prone to these kinds of conflicts. But one of the outcomes of this analysis is, and I mean, this is another one, you know, is it a terrorist attack or should we frame it in different terms? And what is the right way of putting it? You see the same with hijacked, for instance, or is there a more apt word to this historical truth, but that is deeply inflicted with forms of mnemonic resonance here.
Hey, Christian, you've got about a minute left.
Yeah, I'm finishing. But the point is, that there is no, I mean, of course, there are articles that are very, well, I mean, they're like a giveaway in terms of these cultural conflicts that are happening. The point, however, is that, and I'm intrigued by that, is that you find these conflicts going on in all sorts of articles. So there is, I mean, there's the same happening with feta, which is a long story of conflict around the place where it was invented, that has very much to do with mnemonic allegiances and forms of cultural, historical, national identity that play a role here. And you can, I mean, browse through the tool with different dashboards that allow you to take a look at different elements of these conflicts. So I would like to end with, you know, what I'm interested now is not so much, I mean, looking at the past in terms of mnemonic realization always has an element around the present, but also about the future. So I would like to return to Wikipedia in terms of retrospection, but also prospection. So when we look at the definition of mediated memories, that always involves an element of creating and recreating a sense of the past, the present, and the future. And here we are. This is an article from the German Spiegel, which is it's titled in English, "Remembering is a fight for the future." And so we treat it like this and look at Wikipedia on these terms. I think a couple of interesting topics pop up, like, for instance, the future of memory, the idea of productive remembering, or the idea that reflexive modernity, as described by Giddens and others, always has an element of reflexive remembering. So that we are on the spot of historical co-presence and witnessing, we are already part of remembering and documenting. Here's just, and I end with this image. This is the protests of Occupy Wall Street. And this is a photo shot from the New York Public Museum that they, on the very spot, started collecting the material, the ephemeral materials of these protests to keep a track and record for future generations. And I believe the same is happening on Wikipedia, also in terms of memory making. So I thank you for, well, listening to me and having me.
Thank you so much, Christian. It wouldn't have been a conference on memory and Wikipedia without you here. So our next speaker is Murray Phillips, Professor of Sport History at the University of Queensland. So Murray, please do commence your slideshow whenever you like. And Murray will be presenting on the Australian Paralympians project.
Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to present on this. My topic is about tensions, compromises and achievements. Again, reflecting a lot of the discussions we've had already in this conference about working with Wikipedia. And as Michael mentioned, my background is a historian, but I'd like to start with acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians of the land that we work and live on. And the map I show here for the non-Australians is the Aboriginal history and legacy of languages and tribal groups that occupied what we now know as Australia. The project that I'm going to set up this brief discussion about is the Australian Paralympic History Project. It was part of a research grant that we were lucky to win. And I worked with two of my colleagues, Gary Osmond and Tony Nah, and there was three prongs to this project, and that's what I want to mention these because they're all interlinked. There's a hard copy traditional book that's almost finished. There's Paralympic Stories, which is a website about the history of the Paralympic movement, and then of course the interlinked Wikipedia pages. The three players in this project were University of Queensland, Paralympics Australia, which is the national body for disability sport that really organises teams for the Paralympic Games. And then our third partner, our industry partner, was Wikimedia Australia. This is the website of the project, so one arm of the project. And I show you this because a lot of the material on the website was linked to Wikipedia. So for example, here you'll see a whole host of individual participants, and we hot link the pages that we created in Wikipedia for this project. So for example, the first Indigenous Paralympian and the first Torres Strait Islander Paralympian. We tracked for a while, for quite a while, the hits on these group of pages, group of articles we created for Wikipedia on the project. So we created roughly 1,000 articles, and up to 2019, they were viewed roughly 14 million times. And that's a really important number in terms of the reach of Wikipedia, which we're all familiar with. It's also really important in terms of organisations in Australia, sporting organisations and other organisations. The number of hits on Wikipedia articles is far exceeds what on the traditional website for the organisation. So it was an insight for these organisations of the reach and the scope and the power of Wikipedia in many ways. We developed a community of practice, roughly around 100 people, and you can see here many of them were former Paralympians or people with disabilities. We had a Wikipedia in residence who would go to various Paralympic Games. Many of the students at my university worked on a whole host of Wikipedia articles as part of the courses that we ran. And we worked with a whole host of memory institutions to make this work. And for example, National Film and Sound Archive, Clearinghouse for Sport, which is National Sporting Library, the National Library of Australia. So it was a multi-institutional project, and that was the strength of this project. So what I want to talk to you today briefly about was some of the challenges that I found and some of the other historians working on the project. And it was some of the key core content policies, which were the real challenges. So I'm going to mention three and articulate some of the issues that were challenges for us. So verification, as you all know, references are really important to Wikipedia and part of the infrastructure of Wikipedia. But the role of footnotes as opposed to references are quite significant in history, and for many people it is the making of history. It's really quite contested in the philosophical dimensions of history about what constitutes the importance of footnotes. Are they the intellectual muscle of history, or are they just a reality effect that historians use to work with the material they have at hand? And there's also debates about the ways in which they work effectively, footnotes. So it's a twin discourse whereby there is certainly, just move this, twin discourse that supports the narrative or goes well beyond the narrative. So, for example, as you know, footnotes can be really quite extensive. They can extend the argument, contest the argument, they can show nuances and so on. But I guess what I'm getting at is that footnotes are an important part of the historical toolbox. Wikipedia, the references strictly stick to the sources for verification. And so on the front page, we don't see a lot of the issues that you would see in a historical document. But all the work that goes behind the scenes, we've had several presentations already that talk about the back end of Wikipedia, which many people don't know. So the talk pages are a very powerful way of looking at the debates and the issues and the contests and the challenges that go into the creation of pages. So it's happening in a different space to where it's happening for historians. No original research, another one of the content policies. The priority is with secondary sources, and that's a bit of an epistemological shift for many historians. And you're required to shift the primary sources to the background and privilege secondary sources. Again, for many historians, that's really a considerable challenge. because a lot of our work is driven from primary research, primary sources, and I guess it depends on how you choose to use primary sources, how you privilege them or how you don't. And a lot of work's been done to critique the use of primary sources and frame that in the context of the type of historian that we're talking about. Are we talking about reconstructionist historians, that is the past as it was? And if you read some of the historical textbooks, if you look at a lot of the reconstructionist books that detail the way, the mode of history making, they talk about taxonomies, guidelines, and they talk about craft-like skills. So there's a particular way in which historians work from that perspective to privilege primary sources. Even if you're a constructionist, that is, as Alan Munslow would say, someone who uses primary sources in the context of social theory, so you've got inductive inferences from primary sources that you worked in a much larger web, or even if you're a deconstructionist, deconstructionists still pay attention to the evidence. And they understand that narratives are limited by the nature of the evidence. So the point is here, for historians, this is a conceptual leap to be able to work with Wikipedia, given the toolbox that Wikipedia provides. And finally, the neutral point of view, which is the foundation of Wikipedia, has a lot in common with the concept of objectivity in history. And objectivity in history, for those who are not working in this space, has been highly contested over a long period of time. It really ramped up in the postmodern kind of era. And it's been critiqued really widely in the philosophical circles of history, although a lot of practicing historians still see themselves working as objective historians with the primary sources. And that's required and necessitated a shift in what objectivity is. So there's a body of knowledge now around qualified objectivity that acknowledges the subjectivity of historical interpretation. And then finally, there are the deconstructionist historians who reject the logic and practical realist positions. And they understand that we can't step beyond our beliefs or ideologies, arguments and implantments, theories, and the decisions we make as authors to produce accounts. So in essence, that's a short, sharp summary of some of the challenges that I face as a historian and my colleagues that face as a historian working with Wikipedia. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand you over.
Thank you so much, Murray. That was fantastic. And I wonder if you've read Roy Rosenzweig's article on Can History Be Open Source? Who raised many of those similar issues about the historicist approach of Wikipedians as they compose the encyclopedia. Yep. And that was indeed a very concise talk. Thank you very much. Our third speaker for this session is Petros Apostolopoulos, who's based at the University of Luxembourg. I have your slides here, Petros, or would you like to share them yourself?
I can share it.
Okay, take it away.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so hi everyone, good morning to everyone. I'm Petros Apostolopoulos, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Luxembourg. And in my PhD research, I explored the production of historical knowledge on Wikipedia, and I mainly focused on historical articles related to modern United States history. So in a part of my PhD research, I wanted to ask Wikipedia editors to tell me about their experiences from editing, creating historical articles. So I designed an online survey in which 100 Wikipedia users participated, and I recruited the participants from 3 different wiki projects: the Wiki Project United States History, the Wiki Project Military History, because it was the most popular one, and the Wiki Project Women in Red. So the participants were asked several open-ended questions, but one of them was why they decide to spend their time and write about history on Wikipedia. So to that question, the largest number of respondents answered that they enjoy reading, writing, and doing research about history. So that response appeared in 58 comments. I love learning and writing, and Wikipedia gives me the opportunity to do all three, an editor wrote. Another editor wrote, I enjoy it. I like to get good history out there. I enjoy writing nonfiction and doing research. Wikipedia has been a productive outlet for those hobbies, which seems like it benefits others. I also like the idea that my work sees the light of day, an editor added. So engaging with history on Wikipedia appeared an enjoyable activity that allows editors to read, write, and conduct research about history. It allows them to unfold their historical interest and investigate more historical topics and themes. As an editor explained, I write about history on Wikipedia because I like to read about history. I like researching historical topics and sharing historical information that is not available on Wikipedia. The largest number of the respondents engage with history because they enjoy multiple aspects of historical knowledge production, as what I do as a historian, like writing, editing, researching. So the practice of editing and creating historical articles seems also an entertaining and pleasurable activity. As an editor mentioned, from a young age, I have enjoyed history very much. When other kids were outside playing or inside playing video games, I was reading, consuming historical knowledge before I was even in middle school. I'm not sure why it's so pleasurable and entertaining to learn about and discuss history, but nevertheless, my interest in history is very high. This is why I both contribute and read history on Wikipedia. So their involvement in the production of history appears a fun activity, a hobby with which Wikipedians love to engage. I have been personally interested in history since middle school. Wikipedia editing about history is thus an extension of my hobby, an editor described. So editing or creating articles constitutes a passion for a passion that most editors have for history. Users write about history not only because it's a fun activity, but also because they want to provide better history. So that reason appeared in 37 comments, and it was the second most frequent factor. So for many users, history on Wikipedia needs corrections and updates, and therefore they engage with historical articles to provide better knowledge about the past in a better way. So many users express the need to correct the past, expand it, and to represent it in a better way and communicate it to the public. So as an editor mentioned, sometimes I see history that is either so sparse or so bad, and I feel a compelling need to either expand it or correct it. I feel strongly that people should have free access to accurate and properly sourced information, another editor reported. So Wikipedia editors participate in historical knowledge production to fill in gaps that exist, and they decide to edit articles or create new ones. One of the most interesting answers came from an editor who wrote, I believe that a complete and accurate understanding of history is essential to being a good citizen. So we see that for that user, providing a better history on Wikipedia is not just having access, is essential to being a good citizen. In many responses, good knowledge of history does not only mean a better understanding of the past, but a better awareness of the present and of the future. So Wikipedians feel obliged to produce an accurate, complete, and based on reliable historical sources knowledge. However, providing better history does not only mean that the knowledge will be more accurate, but it will offer a more balanced historical narrative about the past. So in other words, for many users, better history means non-biased historical articles. As an editor wrote, I specifically work to reduce systematic biases and increase Wikipedia's coverage of historically marginalized groups. I write to redress the imbalance of writing on women's history, another editor added. So those editors see their participation in Wikipedia as a practice to redress the lack of coverage of women's history, indigenous people's history, the history of social minorities, of the history of the non-Western world, and other neglected historical topics. As an editor described, I want to encourage more understanding of topics often dismissed or overlooked, like indigenous people's history, women's history, the history of defunct institutions, rural society, and so on. So all the problems that characterize Wikipedia, like gender imbalance, Eurocentrism, do not make users leave the project. Instead, it motivates them to remain active and provide better history to the public. So the third reason why editors decide to write about history is to make history more accessible to the public. So it's not only important to produce accurate, less biased historical knowledge about the past, but also to be able to communicate it to the public. That reason appeared in 21 comments. To pass on what I know, an editor wrote, I write about history to make the knowledge I receive as a graduate student accessible to as many people as possible. I believe that this is an important step in making formerly gate-kept knowledge more freely accessible, another editor added. So the significance of making history accessible to the public is obvious in many comments. So the editors see Wikipedia as a digital space where they can place their stories and disseminate them to the public. As an editor put it, I want to be part of something greater than myself. Once something is on Wikipedia, it's also much easier to find. So I will also write with the hope it makes historical information more accessible to the others. So Wikipedians are aware that the historical knowledge they will produce will be stored in a digital public space, which is visited daily by millions of users. So they will make, as they write, the historical record available for public consumption. So the fourth reason why they participate in the production of history is because they want to prevent history from getting lost or being forgotten. So for 13 respondents, history on Wikipedia cannot be get easily lost, as it's placed in a digital space that the public can constantly visit. For that reason, they seem kind of obliged to produce history and store it on Wikipedia, as they want to prevent the past from falling into oblivion. As an editor argued, I'm a skilled, experienced, retired writer, and I want to add new historical entries to Wikipedia, specifically about women who made a difference in their time, but are in danger of having their stories lost if they're not added to Wiki. So writing about history, it's a way to honor the memory of people who died in the past, and their stories should not be lost, especially those who belong to social minorities and communities underrepresented on Wikipedia, such as women, indigenous people, Black people, labor workers, immigrants, and so on. Another editor described, I feel that often people forget where we come from if the information isn't easy to access. I try to also write about Black people, indigenous people, people of color history, since that history isn't as recorded in our collective consciousness. Another editor wrote, it's a way of paying back the working class people of Britain who paid for my education. So several editors expressed the need to write about histories that shouldn't get lost or forgotten. So Wikipedia seems to offer that opportunity and enable them to collect and disseminate the histories of the past, but also not just for the past, but for the present, and for offering a more inclusive future. So the last reason is writing about history does not only mean it's investigating historical topics and themes that are strongly connected to the lives of editors. So that reason appeared in 6 comments, and some editors see Wikipedia as a chance to explore their family history and learn more about their personal pasts. As an editor argued, I found it a useful means to apply knowledge I had gained in the course of researching family history, and then to continue learning and extend my curiosity and knowledge to new areas. It's not only the history of their families, but also broader historical events in which their families have been involved. One example, my father was a World War II veteran. I became interested in history at a young age, especially World War II. I started reading about the war, explained the editor. So all this experience, personal experiences of the past, lead some Wikipedians to investigate the past further and transform their personal experiences and memories into historical articles. So thank you very much.